Welcome to the analysis of my fourth game ever against an international master. Now I have a pretty good score surprisingly against international masters. I have 1.5 out of 3 all time against IMs, beating an IM in 17 moves, drawing an IM last tournament, and losing to an IM the first time I played one. And so now I am playing an IM from England, Matthew Wadsworth, whom I did a lot of research on, goes to Cambridge, studies economics, and has an international master title. So I know a lot about this guy. So d4 was played. Usually Matthew likes to go with knight f3 or c4 things. I had a lot of preparation against this game because I'm playing an IM. This is why I am in Cambridge, England for this tournament. It's to play higher rated players and beat them. So I'm fully prepared, fully committed to this. d4 is played, I go d5, immediately out of my preparation. He usually goes knight f3. I had some spicy prep against that, which I will reveal after another game, one other time, but yes. Okay, so d4, d5, my opponent goes c4, and I go e6. My opponent usually doesn't go for these queen gambit things, but had played this, I think, once this tournament, and played it again, I guess. So I go e6, my typical. Knight f3, and now I go for a triangle system. So the goal is to put your pawns in a triangle and then develop just very solidly with knight f6, knight bd7, and then bishop d6. And here my opponent stumps me. My opponent plays an opening in which I have a bad score against, and it's knight bd2. And I'm losing my marbles because this is the start of a Catalan. A Catalan is an opening in which white decides to not develop their bishop on this side of the board, but instead fianchettos their bishop and castles in order to play e4. And this has really good results for white on the top GM scale, and has really good results for white against Zachary Sane, a certain Zachary Sane. And here I have to suit up. Surprise, surprise. I got really surprised here. So I develop, my opponent goes g3, and I develop like this. So I play my typical spiel against the Catalan. So bishop d6 is possible, and also in the theory book I own, b6 is also possible. I play bishop d6 though, and after castles, I go castles. And the idea is that on queen c2 to leverage the e4 push, I go rook e8, and then pawn e4, and I go knight takes, very important knight takes. If pawn takes, just knight g4. So knight takes, pawn takes, queen takes, and then e5. That's my theory book. And now my opponent brings me out of theory with b3. Well, I'm still in theory, I know about this line, but it's a bit shaded gray area about what white should do against b3. Bringing this bishop to b2 and just capitulating this e5 square so I don't have e5 resource. So preventing in advance my plan so that their plan can go smoothly. So b3 is played and I go e5. I have no patience here and I go for the center. And actually, this strategic decision to move a pawn twice, which is usually trash, is actually pretty good. It's the best low engine depth move. Queen e7 is also good. But e5 is not bad, takes, and my opponent played this very quickly actually. Takes, and I go knight takes. Actually, I have more time than my opponent, I'm surprised. Knight takes, my opponent goes for bishop b2, pressuring this knight, and believe it or not, the best move in this position by far is knight takes f3. And usually, you're not supposed to develop a knight 2 moves and then trade it on the 3rd move. I did this in round 5 and lost in the Gioco Piano. I don't know if you remember. Lesson supposed to be learned. So I learned my lesson and I didn't play this, but in this position, it's the best move. So knight takes would be happening and then rook e8. And I don't like this. I don't like this for black. Maybe you might like this, but I don't love this. So I go with queen e7, something that looks a little bit better. The idea is that after you take my knight and we swipe off everything, knight c4, and my plan was originally to go queen h5, and I'm looking on my knight on d5, and I'm gonna play bishop e6 and be fine. I'm fine. The problem is on queen h5, there's a nice little tactic. Well, it's not a tactic, it's just a really nice positional move, e4. e4 attacks my queen, attacks my knight, and if I trade queens, which is pretty forced at this point, rook takes, and my knight moves, and this looks very ugly to say the least. I mean, white are just absolutely tanking the black pieces. And I'm not here for it, and I'm not gonna play that. So after knight c4, I go back to e7. Sacking a pawn, but not really. After takes, queen takes e2 is fine. And this is an isolated queen's pawn. An isolated queen's pawn is a theme I have been studying for the past 2 weeks before this tournament, And it happened here, but I'm on the opposite side of the isolated pawn. The Isolani is good when you can stop it, break it, and win it. And my opponent has that opportunity in this game. And that's why queen e7 is a mistake, because it lets my opponent 5 moves down the road to create an isolated pawn in this position. My opponent plays kind of terrifically, very textbook-wise against this pawn. I was told that you need to block it with a knight, but in this case it doesn't matter, you can block it with a queen. So queen d4 is the next move of my opponent. You need to block this pawn and attack it. My opponent is attacking it twice already. I go rook d8 and now blocks it with queen d4. A move he plays almost instantly. As you can see, the time difference is 0. So queen d4. I want to trade it off, but if queen e4 here, you can just like support with like rook fd1. So I didn't play that. I played bishop h3 first, rook fd1 to triple attack this pawn, and now I go for b6. It's a bit of a bad move. I wanted to go rook c8 to get this file, but I didn't want to give this pawn on a7. So I go with b6 and trying to play against this queen's diagonal here. Actually, this gives a really nice tactic, which is like impossible to see. My opponent did not see it. But it's actually time for white to trade these pawns because white has a tactic here. That is insane. Knight takes d5, queen takes e2, and now queen h4, attacking my bishop. It's not just attacking my bishop, but for sake of argument, bishop e6, let's say. Now white has knight c3, it's a defensive tactic, defending this and attacking it's a double attack, and you're defending here. So if rook takes, defending the rook, attacking the queen, and threatening checkmate in 2 moves. I can't defend this. That's if bishop e6. If bishop g4, knight e7 check, and now I have to sack my queen on e7. If king f8, there's a discovered check with knight g6, and I lose the game. And so the queen has to sack here, and the engine says it's just a little bit better for white. But black has some drawing chances. It would be very hard to spot this in a game defensively for the black pieces. My opponent goes for rook ac1, and I go for queen e4. I want to trade these queens. I want to get rid of my isolated pawn. And here my opponent goes with rook c7. Very patient with these queens, not doing anything. On knight takes, I would still have queen takes here. Rook c7, not giving up anything. And now I trade. Because I saw that I can go into an endgame here, and upon seeing this endgame and playing it, I was like, okay, I've had 2 bishop versus knight endgames in the past month, which is insane. In both of those endgames, bishop versus knight, I was down a pawn, I managed to draw one of them, and I managed to lose the other one of them. Rounds 5 and 9 of the Sevilla Open back in my videos. So I was pretty confident going into this endgame with a pawn down, because in both of those games, it was a completely dead draw. But here, I was like very confident that it's a draw. You put on a top engine here and it says +3. And this makes me wonder to myself that I need to really study endgames, like in full, because this is a weakness of mine. I misevaluated this endgame supposing that it was a draw, and in fact, this is a losing. And let's learn why this is losing. I go with my king up. You traditionally want to bring your king to the center in the endgame. This is the case here. Matthew goes with f3 as well, bringing the king to the center, but there's an underneath threat here, and that is g4. My opponent is threatening to literally go g4 and knight f2 and trap my bishop. So bishop e6, we're going back, king f2, and now we bring our kings to the center, and I go a5. Okay, let me tell you my plan. I want to trade off all of these pawns, and then my king can stay in the same vicinity, and against this 4v3, I can manage to draw this. That's the plan that I have. Now, it's tricky to really trade a 2v2. And I say this from experience of this game. After e4, I go a4. So trying to trade the a pawn for my a4 pawn. And here it's just really impossible to get this pawn here. Just really hard. So I went king c6 to try to go b5, king c3, and here b5, a5, and white is doing very nicely. So I go bishop b1, and here I get surprised. Knight c4. And now you kind of understand why white went for this dubious king c3. The idea here is to play knight d2, bishop here, and then knight b3 check. And once my king moves, king b2, and we get into a pawn endgame. I don't know how I prevent this. On knight c4, like if I go bishop a2, king b4, and white is just pressing me, and I think I'll eventually lose this, for sure. So I didn't know what to do. Yeah, I didn't know what to do here. So I obviously saw, I saw check, and I saw this, and I had to go into it. It's pretty forced from here on out. So I trade, and now we're into a pawn endgame that's completely losing for white, but there's still chances to mess it up. But my opponent's an IM who's been playing extremely quick. I have 6 minutes to my opponent's 55 minutes. Bro is killing it. So I go king c5, f4, I go h6, e5, h5, and now king c3. I go b5, and after these next two moves, I resign, a5, creating a pass pawn. I go check, king here, and I'm about to win this pawn when my opponent plays the lethal f5. Completely missed it. And although I went over this game pretty fast, I spent a lot of effort and time trying to win this game. I was treading water around the time I got that isolated pawn, and I would say it's because of the Catalan. My Catalan prep is not good enough, and I'm striving to make this Catalan prep happen after this tournament so that I'm all good on the Catalan, even winning on the Catalan. And in a future video, you'll see me with a smile when my opponent plays a Catalan because I will have won. That is my promise to you. My next round tomorrow, I am paired up against a FIDE master. I'm paired up against a 2200 FM. It's gonna be a wild round. See you tomorrow.